Hey guys, and welcome to this episode. This is David with Geeks and Jocks. We're going to be talking about what is more expensive to play, either Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic, and that is what this episode is going to be about. So let's jump into the video. So a friend of mine asked me what was better to get into. He remembers playing Yu-Gi-Oh from back in the day, but he stopped playing when Synchros came out. And then he does remember trying to learn Magic, but he never got into learning Magic. So he asked me what was the best of the two to get into, and we started talking about the economics of it all, and that is what prompted me to make this video. So first of all, I think that Yu-Gi-Oh is cheaper to get into if you're gonna go and play casually, but we gotta understand that there are two different TCGs. First of all, because one of them is just one eternal format with forbidden and limited lists, and then the other one is a ever-rotating comprised of several formats, meaning that they have standard, they have pioneer, they have modern, they have legacy, and they have vintage. And not only they have a forbidden list for all of these formats, but they also have time constraint, right? They have sets that are not legal in that specific format. If you're gonna play casually, Yu-Gi-Oh is gonna be the cheapest one, because if you can just merge together three structure decks that are really good, if you ask me, they're really good to getting players to the Yu-Gi-Oh game. And this will run you anywhere between $10 and $12 each, and they're gonna be around $30 to $40 with tax if you're gonna play those three decks. I actually remember putting together two Dino Smashers Fury and just playing at my locals, and that was around $20. Whereas in Magic, they were called Planeswalker decks, and they were not good. You cannot merge them together and make a deck. Actually, they were really bad at doing so. It was just not something you were going to do. Plus, Magic, you couldn't put three together because they actually have the 4 copies per card rule. So you will have to have bought 4 of them. And they were running in anywhere between $15 to $20 each. So that would have been at the high end, kind of like $80. But even so, they were just not a good deck. That's why they discontinued them after Theros, and they came out with what they were called Challenger decks. Now, these ones are very good. These ones are just ready to go, ready to play, anywhere between $25.99 and $34.99. You're gonna be able to purchase a Challenger deck for Standard or Pioneer. So in this regard, I think Yu-Gi-Oh has the upper hand just because they had the structure decks that were actually good since the beginning. I know they haven't changed this for the longest time, because I do remember having structure decks that were very, very good. In Magic, they're cheaper now, or kind of in the same realm of price, because they are ready to go if you just buy one. But they just recently brought back the Challenger decks for Standard and for Pioneer. So now, if we make it a little bit more competitive, if you're gonna play Fridays on your local game store, then we have decks like Prank Kids, Invoked, Dogmatica, and like Eldritch. There are kind of the decks you're gonna see a lot in your locals. I know that the Yu-Gi-Oh format changes a lot because it is an eternal format and every card is available to you. But these kind of decks range between $600 and $750, with what is the main deck of 40 cards, the extra deck of 15 cards, and the side deck of 15 cards. And for Magic, we have in Standard decks like Esper mid-range, Grixis Vampires, and Naya mid-range, which are kind of like the ones you're gonna encounter when you play in your Friday night Magic, that range anywhere between $270 to like $550 on the upper end of it. So up to here, Magic is cheaper to play when it comes to Standard, because the set are very, very constrained, and there's not a lot of cards to choose from. And since they have a time limit, I think that actually this is what brings a kind of like a glass ceiling to the prices of Standard cards, because since they have a lifespan, some of these cards will not translate good into other formats, and therefore making them cheaper. But when you move to Pioneer, we have decks like Winota that are like $350, Boros Burn that is like $250, and Rakdos mid-range that is like $500 to $600 on the upper end. So it's still cheaper to play Magic than it is to play Yu-Gi-Oh at a more competitive level when it comes to playing at your local game store, because these decks are $500 on the upper end, but like the Yu-Gi-Oh decks are way more expensive than that. But when it gets to Modern, which is a wider, you have a bigger pool of cards, and these cards are proven to work. Some of these cards are played into like more the legacy and the vintage formats, which are the latter formats of Magic, or the earliest formats of Magic, the ones that accept any type of card. So these cards are proven and they are played in those formats, so they are very, very good. You know, we have decks like Murktide that runs you around $1250, Elementals, which runs you around $1,800, Yawgmoth combo, which is around $900. Then it is more expensive to play Magic the Gathering. Now, when it comes to Legacy and Vintage, the only reason I don't include them here is because Legacy and Vintage, it's very, very rare that you're gonna have a local scene that plays Legacy and Vintage, unless you are in a very, you know, high dense metropolis, you know, Dallas, Texas, you know, New York, California. I'm sure they play Legacy and Vintage on a regular basis, once a week. And these decks are very, very expensive. You know, a Legacy deck will probably cost you around $5,000 to like $7,000. Vintage, on the other hand, is gonna run you about, on the floor end is gonna be like 20 grand. And the higher end is like 88,000. Like Tinker, I think it's Izzet Tinker is one of the most expensive decks right now. There are actually being played, not just cards that are expensive just thrown in together. So I mean, they're out of the question even for Magic players sometimes. If you don't let them use like proxies, they wouldn't be able to play these decks. So it's kind of unfair to get to compare Legacy and Vintage into like Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, we do have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck that was around $1,320. That is Drytron, that just won a YCQ, which is like a regional in Dallas earlier in the month. And that deck on the lower end, like all the reprints and everything, is like $900. And if you play the original card, it's like $1,300. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the biggest range of prices because of the reprint policy. They were the first ones to come out with like alternate rares and that kind of stuff. So like if you put that deck specifically on like the Starlight rares, on like Diddy Crows, IP Mascarenas, and other kind of stuff, then that deck goes way up there to like $5,000. So if you ask me, I would actually get into like Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't want to spend that much money because it has a bigger range of where like your cards, since they are reprinted so many times, you have a better chance to get cheaper cards and play them in several decks, because they have cards that are used in many decks, whereas in Magic you are constrained by your colors. Not every card can be played in every deck, whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't have that constraint. So if you ask me, even looking at the numbers here, Magic is cheaper when you're doing Standard and Pioneer, but these are the formats that rotate the most. And it's more expensive when it comes to Modern, but that format kind of like sticks. And even though it's not obvious, I think that a more fair comparison is comparing Modern and Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Modern is almost the last 20 years of cards are legal in this format, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been around for almost 20 years, or a little bit over 20 years, and that is why I think it's a more fair comparison. If we compare kind of like apples to apples, Modern and the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, then I will agree that it's cheaper to get into Yu-Gi-Oh! Plus you get a lot more reprints. They're actually very, very close to each other, where you have a tin that is released every year, and even though in Magic you have a core set, it's not the same as where they do it in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where like you get a tin or get a structure deck, and you're assured to get the card that you wanna get. So at the end, even on the lower end or the high end, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is cheaper than Magic. In Magic, it gets very, very expensive when you get into like the modern decks. Plus, this is for every deck. Like I said, not all the cards are interchangeable in between decks. Like if you like to play several decks, this is not going to be the case, where in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have some of the cards that can be shared in between decks. They are kind of like the most expensive cards because they can be used in almost any deck. So that wraps it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching, consider subscribing, and like always, comment, like, and share if you like our videos. That's it for today's video. I want to thank Dex, our sponsor for this video. Link is in the description of this video. That's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.